only 5 years old when this happened. Tell
Yes.
us more.
So I think I was five. It's hard to know as a child exactly time frames and ages, right? We may remember. I remember things more by grades in school, and I know I was not yet in school, and I know I couldn't tie my shoes yet.
Hi, Stacey. I'm so excited that you're joining us here today on the Pursue Your Spark podcast.
Hi, Heike. Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
As always, we're diving right into our conversations without further ado. And in Dispatches from the Couch, your book, you describe how childhood trauma resurfaced in midlife and led you to speak out. Many of your experiences connect with what's known as the ACEs framework, adverse childhood experiences. For those who aren't familiar with that terminology, can you explain what it stands for and how learning about them helped you make sense of your own story? I know that's a lot.
Thank you for asking that. As you said, ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences, and it is really a questionnaire style assessment that is provided to therapists and social workers and others to be able to assess the possible reasons behind um, uh, a patient or a client, or in some cases, a child themselves, um, behaviors and attitudes, and unfortunately, sometimes outbursts. It's
Mhm.
oftentimes that we realize something negative has happened because, especially children, are acting out. But for me, discovering that there was this ACEs questionnaire helped me to understand and validate that the experiences I went through as a child were life changing and life shaping. And so when you go through something like childhood sexual abuse, which is one of the uh, factors on the ACE questionnaire. Physical abuse is also on the questionnaire. Neglect, both physical and emotional neglect, any type of violence. And so the more of these different types of experiences someone has, the higher their ACE score turns out to be. And it is an imperfect tool. So it is something that just gets you started thinking about what happened to you as an individual. But it is then something that you have to realize, did that experience impact you in a more profound or less profound way than the average person or another person? And so, as an individual, taking those ACE scores and realizing what that means to you becomes something very different than it becoming a number in a case file, for instance.
Yeah, I think you shared that link with me. So I read through that and it was eye-opening. And I will put the link in the show notes for the listeners too. Since I would think that people that are listening to this episode today and anytime they're dealing with trauma, this is one thing that we can at least start to analyze or think back of what can we do, where do we even start? And when we're tying in your story, you were only 5 years old when this happened. Tell
Yes.
us more.
So I think I was five. It's hard to know as a child exactly time frames and ages, right? We may remember. I remember things more by grades in school, and I know I was not yet in school, and I know I couldn't tie my shoes yet. And that memory of realizing the first uh, incident with my abuser was before I could tie my shoes was important in giving myself some empathy and some grace. Because, like so many who go through abuse, especially as children, we want to blame ourselves. And so when we look at what happens with the ACEs, the things that a child might experience, like having a family member die by suicide, or having a family member have substance abuse problems, or mental health problems. Children find more safety in blaming themselves than believing that their parent or their caregiver is somehow not going to be able to take care of them. And if you look at the list of adverse childhood experiences, you realize that all of those will compromise the abuser or the parent or the person who's inflicting those adverse experiences' ability to really care for a child. And isn't that sad that that's what a child has to go through?
And I think that when I read your synopsis of your book, is that number one, as a child, you blame yourself. You're at fault. You feel like you can't reach out to the person that's protecting you. You're at the mercy or friendliness, I almost would say. This is my notion of the kindness of your abuser, how they make you feel, how they treat you. And you don't see anything wrong with this because as children, we don't know better. We don't know any different, that this is wrong, that this is not okay to go the way the abuse is going. And I remember the line where you said, yeah, he put me on a chair so he can kiss me on my mouth. And you said it was the deacon at your church that was your abuser. And when you think about that, oh, we all kiss our family members. Maybe, probably not on the mouth, but definitely we kiss them. So it doesn't seem for a child to be anything that abnormal until it gets to a further abuse in the relationship, right?
Absolutely. It is very subtle. The term that psychologists use is grooming, and I think that's a perfect term. It started even before that. My mother shared with me once we were on the same team and trying to help me recover once I disclosed to her that there was a time he brought a puzzle to an event just for me, nothing for any of the other children who would be there, but brought a puzzle and I sat on his lap and uh, worked through this puzzle with him. And I have no memory of this. So this was probably, when I was 3 or 4. And so I think serial abusers know how to identify children who um, they'll be able to start this process with and continue this process with. And so the first incident of sexual violation was kissing,
Mhm.
and I was not at all afraid during that incident. It felt weird, but it felt special. And that's the other insidious way that abusers manipulate children, is to make them feel special. And what child doesn't want to feel special?
Right. It's we all want to be special. We all want to shine. We all want to be acknowledged, especially by an adult who says, "Wow, you're doing things great," and the praise we get, we all thrive on that. Now, as the abuse continued, what I was curious about, Stacey, is what made you tell?
That is such an important question. I thank you for asking it, because as a child, I was a people pleaser. And one of the things that trauma can do, and that was just my nature. I loved praise. I loved being a good girl. But one of the things that trauma can do, one of the um, things that happens to our brain, is that our efforts to protect ourselves can fall into the categories that many of us have heard, the fight or the flight.
Mhm.
But there's also the idea of freeze and fawn. And the fawn idea is the one that I think is least well known and least well understood. But ultimately, the people pleasing that so many of us, and I will say so many women, find themselves conditioned to profess into the world, and the way to behave, is a fawn response. It's a way of trying to assure that we are safe and protected and we can avoid these dangerous things in the future. And so when I was in 5th grade, a woman from a Victims Resource Center came and talked to my fifth grade class, and I want to thank that fifth grade teacher anonymously for bringing her to our class. And she told us about child abuse, including child sexual abuse. And I was so confused that I wasn't even sure that what she was talking about was the same thing as had happened to me, because we don't know our bodies as little children. I think we know them better now. I think we have more information now. But I didn't know that I had the body parts I have. And so when she was talking about it, I thought, oh, I'm not sure if that applies to me. But the last thing she said to us was, if you have had any of these things happen to you, tell a parent or a grown-up that you trust. And boy, it took me days to be willing to admit it because I was afraid I was going to get in trouble because all of this felt very taboo, and none of the other students talked about this lady coming afterwards. You know, none of us, we just sort of sat there for it and then were silent about it. But eventually I felt like I had to tell my mother because I was a people pleaser and I did what I was told. And this lady told us to tell. And I am one of the blessed people whose mother's response was a absolute embracing in love and protection and assistance. And unfortunately, Heike, not everybody has that experience. And I do want to honor and acknowledge women who tell, either as children or as adults, and whose response from the person they thought they could trust actually did more damage. And I know how hard that is. And I just want to say I'm so sorry to the women who have had that experience. But for me, telling my mother opened up a lot of strong feelings and confusions and things to face, but it ultimately set me on the road to where I am today. So I just want to acknowledge that and thank my parents for their support.
You know, isn't it interesting that the first thing our brain goes to is guilt, shame? I will get punished for telling that story. I did something wrong. I am the one to blame. Instead of saying, I didn't do anything wrong. I just trusted that adult to do the right thing. And I think no matter how you go through ages, it always comes back to that same thing I just said. We're always putting the blame and the shame on ourselves. And that makes us afraid and scared to speak up, to say something, and to step up for what's right for us. So more power to you that after a couple of days, you said, okay, I'm a people pleaser, let's go for it. I can't imagine what girls and women go through that have to swallow all this for the rest of their lives and not be able to share.
Oh, it's so many, and for so long, for so much of our history, Heike, we know these horrible things and all sorts of horrible things have been happening to children for all of human history. And we really only can say that since um, the feminist movements of the late 20th century, that we were able to create a collective community around women to say this is not okay, and we
Mhm.
need to be able to protect each other.
Yeah.
And it's so unfortunate
Yep.
that there are women who are our age or older. I remember reading in The Courage to Heal when I was younger, Ellen Bass's seminal work, that there was a woman who was in her 80s, and it was, you know, in her last years of life that she whispered this confession of an incident that happened in her teens. And yes, it's tragic, but the only way we can transform these tragedies is to speak on them and to share them and to take them out of the darkness, because that's where the shame is. The secrecy is, I think, also what makes shame so prevalent around these issues.
Yeah. Let me dive back into the brain because you mentioned that just a little bit earlier. You, after this incident, you had many years of therapy, and now you, in your book, you met Piper, which is another therapist. But can the brain reboot itself, or is it just a nice metaphor we tell ourselves when we feel broken?
I think it can be both. I think it can be a both and because it certainly is a helpful metaphor. But there is plenty of work out there in the world of neuroscience, which that is my field, but trauma of the brain is not my expertise. So I don't want to represent myself as something I am not. But I teach about the brain. I teach about the limbic system in particular. And this is the area of our brain that processes emotion and also is part of that fight or flight response. So, particularly the amygdala is the area of our brain that processes fear. And it has direct links to another area of the brain, the hippocampus, which has gotten some play recently. The amygdala and the
Right.
hippocampus are getting their due finally. The hippocampus is where we process new memories, and we know it's associated with learning and memory. And so the idea that scary, fearful things are going to be particularly memorable and particularly going to teach us a lot of lessons
Mhm.
is sort of part of all of our experience. We can remember a time where maybe someone in authority used fear to get us to change our ways or to act in a way they wanted us to. But the other interesting thing is in childhood, this limbic system area develops well, years and years and years before our higher order, our more human areas of our brain, our frontal lobe, and our cortical areas. And so when we think about a child experiencing something fearful, we can understand that their fear centers are fully developed. They can be engulfed in that fear without the ability to sort of rationally think through and understand and try and reason something like, well, this bad thing happened to me, but it doesn't mean I am bad. A shameful thing happened to me, but it doesn't mean I am the person who should be ashamed. Well, this amygdala area, this fear area, has been found in individuals with post-traumatic stress. So we often associate post-traumatic stress with people who are in um, the military and in terrible combat situations, but also with individuals and especially children who experience physical or sexual violation. If you experience that as a child, your amygdala can actually be bigger than the average amygdala. And the bigger a brain area, the more processing you can do for that particular brain area's function. And so I've said to my family many times, so much of what I remember about being a child is being afraid. And I had a bigger brain for being afraid. But I worked hard, as you said, and I worked with many therapists. And I think we got that under control. And then I had an experience, and I talk about it in the book, of attending a sexual violence forum. And a colleague who was maybe experiencing his own fear or his own frustration went into a little bit too much of a victim blaming mode. And it was very intense. And we were in the room and we all sort of didn't seem to know what to do. And we were at an impasse. And I felt like I had the opportunity to say something that could move us forward, move the conversation forward. But to give myself legitimacy, I think I felt like I needed to. I still don't understand this quite yet. I may never. I started my response with, as a victim of sexual violence.
Mhm.
And saying that out loud for the first time, probably in well over a decade, especially in a public forum, brought all of that trauma sort of back to the forefront. But the other thing the brain can do, and particularly we'll talk about it in the amygdala, is the brain can change very rapidly because the places where one neuron connects to another, and these are known as synapses, the synapses can grow closer together. And we're talking on a scale of millimeters. And so very, very rapidly, the brain can change. And that's what I believe I experienced in that moment. My amygdala just sort of had a blossoming of these synaptic connections. And from there, my fear side of myself just took over. And it took session after session after session of therapy for those synapses to readjust. And
And this was with Piper then?
this was with my therapist, Piper. So
Okay,
after that, sorry, go ahead.
because you were, for 20 years, you avoided therapy,
Mm-hmm.
according to what I read. And then you had that incident that you just shared with us. Did it feel like the way I envisioned it, Stacey, is that when this happened, your brain literally exploded like a spark, and you're like, I need to do something. Something has to change. I am not as well as I thought, and I'm taking this confrontation with that person really, really hard. And it almost takes me back to where I was 20 years ago. That's at least the feeling I had.
That's exactly it, Heike. And you're a good reader because you were able to gain that. So that makes me feel good to know that I got that point across. But um, I felt like I was right back where I started. I felt like all the progress I had made, all the um, all the years of therapy I had done, all the life lessons, all the living I had done were erased in an instant.
What gave you then the courage to go and find Piper?
It wasn't courage, it was desperation.
Okay, well,
And I don't want to pretend otherwise. The courage comes in going back the next week and the next week and the next week. That's where individuals, and I will give a shout out to anybody who sticks with therapy, that keep coming back and keep going one step at a time, one session after session is what takes courage. But I don't know that I could have continued to function after that incident if I hadn't found some help. And so I'm very grateful and lucky that I was able to get in to see a therapist right away. It was
And
within a couple of days.
and I also think that it is important to find the right therapist. The first may not be the right person for you. And like you said, you got to keep going back, because I feel that I oftentimes hear, oh, I went to therapy once and it wasn't for me. Or I did 3 sessions and I wasn't, air quotes, healed. They didn't fix me. What do you have to say to that?
Oh, goodness. I have to say first, we need to treat mental health uh, as is as important as physical health. We would never tell cancer diagnosis. We're going to try one session of chemotherapy, and if the tumor doesn't shrink, well, then sorry, you're on your own. And that's what I would equate one session of psychotherapy um, to. You're just getting started. And sometimes, like we know with things like chemotherapy, it can get a lot worse before it gets better.
Yeah.
And so you hit the nail on the head, Heike, by saying finding the right therapist, and that is the right match for you. I call my therapist, I call her Piper in the book, so I'll continue to do that. She's my unicorn. I really know that in this particular moment in my life, she was the right combination of uh, empathy and sympathy and patience and grace and tough questions and tough homework sometimes and honesty. There were times that she had to be honest with me because in that heightened amygdala state, my brain was not being honest with myself. My brain was telling me horrible, horrible intrusive messages, which is also a side effect of PTSD.
Yeah.
And so finding the right therapist really, really does matter. And I will say, I think it's incumbent upon therapists to remind a new client of that. Because if we're showing up, we're in a very vulnerable state. And if they can can help us know that maybe we're going to have 2 or 3 sessions and then decide if we think we're a good fit would be very helpful to, I think, a lot of clients.
Yeah, because sometimes you think, oh, I'm starting here. Oh, this is not for me. Just in general, that's not for me.
Mhm.
Or you get lucky and you find the right person, or like you said, and then what do I do now next? But it's like you said, I agree. It's like finding the right trainer. You don't want to
Yes.
train with somebody who doesn't know Pilates and pretends to know Pilates, or it's not your Pilates style. It's the same idea behind it. So that's really important. I want to ask you, I want to shift to, you said that shifting from asking what happened to me to what did it do to me was a huge turning point for you.
Yes. And I'm so grateful for that first question, and that first question has become something that has some very vocal advocates. So Dr. Bruce Perry is very well known, and the book he and Oprah Winfrey co-wrote, What Happened to You, is making incredible strides in helping us to become a more trauma-informed society. If we can ask the question about the people we work with, about the people we're in community with, our neighbors, our friends, what happened to them to cause them to behave in a certain way? We can find empathy and grace and patience. And I love that that is a focus that we can have in thinking about others. But when we ask that question, what happened to you, and apply it to ourselves, it's very easy to sort of see ourselves as a victim, as there's these things that happened to me. I had no control over them then, and I'm not sure how I can gain control back. For me, the turning point of, rather than just saying these things happened and trying to say them out loud enough times to process them and desensitize to them, the what did it do to you question was a much more personal and profound question for me, because I came to understand, going through all this again at midlife, that even in those 20 years where I thought everything was fine, it had shaped me. It had turned me into um, a people-pleasing workaholic, for instance, because that was the way I could accept um, positive affirmation. It was the way I could accept that I had a place in the world and I was important, because I really could not accept people's affection and care and concern. And I believe that for me, it was as if my abuser had sort of destroyed that part of me that could accept love in return. And that's a sad thing to admit, but only in understanding it could I realize that that wasn't true. Could I realize that this was the thing that I could work to correct for and recover. Imagine if you had lived your whole life with a congenital defect that never was diagnosed, and you just thought this was the way the world was. Right? Imagine a dyslexic never being given the proper support and instruction and education to help to deal with this very physical, um, surprising miswiring of the brain.
Yeah.
Well, that's the way it feels to me, that I lived my whole life not understanding that what the abuse did to me was break my ability to accept love. And I'm learning how to do that now, and that's a pretty great thing.
That takes away the power from the abuser. And
Yes, it
that's
does.
huge. So it takes the power away and gives the power to you, saying there's nothing wrong with me. And the way I've been seeing myself is not true. I don't want to say made it up, but that's the role I created for myself, maybe to be safer, to be in a place that I can exist, I can live my life forward and unpeel that when I'm ready to unpeel that, because you're a scientist trained in objectivity, But healing asks you to really lean into being vulnerable, letting go. What does it mean from your logic, Dr. Lettuce, to now?
There's so much there, Heike, that you said that's so important and so profound. The first thing I just want to respond to is the safety piece. And I
Yeah.
think that's part of it. If you are trying to keep yourself safe, and this act that is supposed to mean love, right? Sexual intimacy between loving partners is a beautiful thing, but it becomes confused and becomes a way of another person to manipulate and have power over us. And so understanding that was my motivation for saying, well, I just will not accept love because it might be actually love in harm in disguise of love. But scientists are human beings, and we are very objective about the science that we do. We're very objective about the data that we collect, and we try very hard to keep our emotions out of that part of our world. But we close those notebooks and take off that lab coat and those safety goggles at the end of the day, and we're still human beings. And many times, I won't name any names, but I will identify myself. I think people are drawn to that objectivity and an all-consuming life as a scientist because it's a way to avoid the discomfort of the subjective life of being a human being. And so that was, I think, another thing I had to do was allow Dr. Hettes to step aside and allow Stacey to really be the person who showed up to those therapy sessions.
Yeah. What surprised you most about yourself once you finally shared your full story?
Oh, that's a good question. Um, Honestly, I think the thing that is most surprising is that I shared it in and of itself, because the shame and the secrecy and the attempts to reinvent yourself at each sort of stage in life bury those secrets deeper and deeper and deeper. And so the very act of sharing it, I think, is a big deal, but also accepting the wonderful support and love that I got in return. And I tried to do that very incrementally and in a very safe way. And that starts with your therapist.
Yeah.
Building that safety and trust is the first stage of working through trauma. And that can take a very long time. And it happens in certain aspects and not in others. And you sort of reveal your story in pieces over time. But also then realizing your friends are your friends for a reason. Those people that you hold close to you are are there because they care about you and you care about them. And so I started sharing my story, even just sharing that I was in therapy
Mhm.
with the people closest to me. And you learn that their responses are positive or not. Sometimes people will walk away because they can't handle it. And then you say, okay, well, if they accepted it, I wonder if this next circle and the next circle and the next circle. And so I've, been working with Piper for 5 years now. And so, that willingness to be able to put a book on Amazon with its description didn't happen all at once. It's a very
Yeah.
incremental thing, I think.
Yeah. Your story speaks to midlife women who've been told to remain silent, remain small, or remain in survival mode. What would you say when somebody picks up your book at Amazon or Barnes and Nobles, wherever you can buy, where people can buy your book? What might the reader find, or what might be the unexpected reader be that is reading that book, that is drawn to the title?
That's a good question. Um, I hope they read the back cover too, because I would not want anybody to dive in without being prepared. And so there's a content warning and all the things. But I think the person who might be most surprised by this is the person who would take that ACE questionnaire and believe they have a score of 0. They don't believe they've experienced any trauma. They don't believe they've ever had any adverse experiences. Life has been good to them, has blessed them, has given them privilege. And all of that may be true. But all women, especially women at midlife, live in the world we live in. And all of us have experienced something that has knocked us down and that we've had to sort of crawl our way back from. And whether your experience and my experience would be given the same score on some psychologist questionnaire doesn't matter. If you can hear Piper's questions, read Piper's questions, and think about what would your answer to those be, then I think the book can be valuable to you. And I also think it can be valuable to us all to realize our humanity. And all of us have been broken or felt broken at times in our lives, and we all deserve the chance to find our way back to ourselves.
Yeah. Can you share a time when you yourself ignited your spark, when you prioritized yourself and took bold action? Because here at the Pursue Your Spark, we're all about taking action, moving forward. So what are you fired up about, Stacey?
Well, I'm fired up about, sorry, I'm trying to pick one. I'm fired up about the idea that we can step back from this question of whether our stories matter, whatever they are. And we can put our stories out there, whether it's to a friend over coffee, whether it's to a classroom of students, whether it is to a lecture hall or on a podcast, that we all have something to share with each other and we can all learn from each other. And I hope that one of the things that we can learn is that we are all worthy of living our best life. And whether we're starting at midlife or we're starting at old age, wherever that starts, or whether, like I try to with my students, my college students, to prioritize ourselves enough to discover who we are and how we can best feel like we're living our best life.
At the end of every show, as always, I ask my guests to offer tips to help my audience pursue their spark. Be strategic, purposeful, authentic, resilient, and or knowledgeable. Which one, what would you tell them? Just pick one or all or?
Yeah. I would put in a plug for therapy. Honestly, I think everybody could benefit from a little bit of therapy. And whether that comes with a professional in a mental health setting, or whether that is finding that friend who you can sit down with and have the most honest conversations and promise each other that you will be receptive to what each other have to say. Just finding those people who can help us keep our stories from becoming secrets.
I like it a lot. Stacey, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your story and your book with my listeners. And let's keep going to therapy.
Sounds good. Heike, thank you so much. I appreciate it.